Welcome to Hail Varsity Radio, the voice of Husker Nation. Insight, opinion, expertise, with the biggest and best names talking Nebraska across the state. Join the show on Twitter at Hail Varsity and at Schmidt_radio. Call in at 402-466-ESPN or 1-800-825-5865. Here's Chris Schmidt.
Great to have you in on a Tuesday. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. Some more staff shaping up for Coach Rhule and Nebraska. We'll tell you about a couple of different additions that have been reported. Good stuff again from our friends at Hail Varsity, Brady Altmans and company, Brandon Vogel, Aaron Sorensen, Jacob Padilla. I mean, doing a great job keeping you up to date with how things are shaping up at Memorial Stadium for that coaching staff. The big question is Mickey Joseph. What's the word on Mickey? Some thoughts we'll get into here in a little bit. Numbers to dial up can join us today on Hail Varsity at 466-3776, 466-3776, 800-825-5865. Give us a follow on Twitter at Schmidt_radio and at Herbal Essence for Elijah. Can watch the show. Do so a couple of different ways. ESPN Lincoln's Facebook, ESPN Lincoln's Twitter, and also the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter handle has us broadcast and streaming at HVarsity Radio. Can also get your episodes of Coffee and Cream with Andrew Rogers, Damon Benning. That show's rocking and rolling here in Lincoln in the morning, 7 to 9. So love those guys being with us, and good content as always. So that's the layout. Can email the show, chris@hailvarsity.com. 20 minutes away, we'll spend time with Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Love talking ball with Mitch. Been a busy week. In hour two, Matt Schick of Schick and Nick, the Hurrdat podcast. And, of course, you know Schick from ESPN Radio, Sirius XM, and ESPN UTV. So you've got to be fired up because pot roast is a reality for you. One of your favorite defensive linemen from Denver, officially here with Nebraska as the defensive line coach. I would say interior defensive line coach. Historically speaking, Coach Rhule has done a two-line setup, right? You got an ends and you've got an interior. You've got a tight end and tackle, and then you have an interior offensive line setup. We'll see where that goes. But what we can report, and Rivals also reporting this, E.J. Barthel, the running backs coach for the University of Connecticut Fighting Huskies, is now the Nebraska running backs coach. He was director of player personnel at Temple for Coach Rhule, was with him at Carolina. But this is what's a couple of things with Barthel. And you know, we're very understanding that the business has the ups and downs where you're going to hire and you're going to fire. You're going to bring in people or you're going to try and go get the best. Right now, what is appealing here about E.J. Barthel, a couple of things. He was recruiting coordinator for James Franklin in 2016. He had a year with Penn State in 2016 and then was gone, but that's a good spot. It's a guy that knows the Big Ten. It's a guy that recruited the Big Ten. It's a guy that recruited the Northeast with his different stops. So E.J. Barthel is a young guy. He's only 37 years old, but he has done time, and I mean that he spent at least a year in the Big Ten as a recruiting coordinator. And just call me crazy, but James Franklin's a pretty intense guy to work for. That is my guess. And you see how well Penn State is traditionally recruited. They're always top three in the Big Ten. And there's been some years, Elijah, where Penn State's finished top 10 in recruiting. So that's the running back spot.
For what it's worth, that 2016 class was 20th in the country, but did post a couple of NFL guys in Miles Sanders and Connor McGovern.
Oh, so Miles Sanders, who's killing it for Philly right now. So He's a recruiting coordinator. So that's there right now. You have Marcus Satterfield, offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach, of course, from South Carolina, and Evan Cooper in the secondary. Corey Campbell, your strength coach. You have the likelihood of either an assistant spot or an analyst for Ed Foley. Ed Foley's background is tight ends and offensive tackles. You also have special teams, an analyst option for not Axel, but Ed Foley. So what does that mean for Coach Becton at Nebraska? And I don't know what your expectation is as far as staff retention. How many guys that were at Nebraska under Scott Frost do you anticipate Matt Rhule realistically keeping? And the two names you hear is Mickey Joseph and Bill Bush. And you heard Coach McBride talk about it yesterday. And our friends in the Morning Coffee and Cream on the Hail Varsity Twitter handle had a great poll question that you can still go vote on at HVarsity Radio. How important is it to you when it comes to Mickey being a part of this equation, staff-wise, moving forward? I think Becton's a heck of a coach. I think Bill Bush is an amazing coach. I think those are three guys that you could look at. Now, guys are going to go hire who they think are really, really good, that they know they can work with and can work for or have work for you. And it also comes down to going and getting people that are familiar with the Big Ten. Matt Rhule played in the Big Ten, right when Penn State got to the Big Ten. He's coached in a Power 5 in the Big 12. He's come from the AAC where that's been the launching spot for a lot of coaches that went on to Power 5s that haven't done well. Rhule is the exception because he wanted Baylor. You got to go get folks that know the league, okay? And from a recruiting standpoint, Barthel, as a running backs coach, looks like is a pretty solid hire.
Well, there's something we should note here in that what's really, really important with these assistant coach hires right now, and some of these guys could even end up being analysts for all we know, but what's really important is Rhule needs guys that he trusts on the recruiting trail, because that's what's so important about these hires right now.
And they got to know the league.
They got to know the league. They got to know the type of guy they need, but they also need to be competent recruiters, and Matt Rhule needs to trust them, because that's what is important about the next 2 weeks, is getting out there and getting guys that can go hit the recruiting trail hard and build your first class before this early signing period is up. And while these guys might not end up being assistant coaches, because there's other coaches Rhule could have in mind that are possibly still coaching, maybe going to a conference title game, maybe going to a bowl game, that you can play it slow on. What's really important about these first hires is to make sure these guys have a recruiting acumen, because that's what's so crucial about these next 2 weeks. Is this is 2 weeks that could make or break your next season. The transfer portal changes some things, but Nebraska needs an infusion of talent, especially along the lines of scrimmage. So when I look at these guys, I look less into what they are as a position coach, because I don't think we're locked into these guys being position coaches just yet. We just know they're a part of the staff.
They'll fit somewhere. They're a puzzle piece.
They're a puzzle piece, but right now what's important is getting the recruiting knocked out, and we'll figure out what they're going to do, whether it's an assistant coach, whether it's an analyst down the road. That's something I am looking at this with the lens of Matt Rhule knowing is top of mind, is how important the recruiting is going to be right away, and really, getting a running start into your recruiting right now.
466-3776 or 800-825-5865 numbers to get in. Here's what I believe, okay? And let's just lay out some of the jobs that are open. Let's talk jobs that are open. You thought you were done with this. Bear with me, you're not. And jobs that are open, and Mickey Joseph. Okay. Take your Husker Red off for a second, okay? Let's do the old blind taste test here. 3 and 6 does what for you if you're an AD wanting to hire? Does it even get on your radar? If you're a good AD, you dig a little bit deeper and you go, 3 and 6 at Nebraska with massive amounts of injuries. The eye test tells me the kids got better. The eye test tells me they improved. They beat Iowa to finish the year. And they survived. They didn't win, but they survived with backup quarterbacks and a makeshift offensive line and the defense got better. Nebraska football finished way better than they've finished in a long time, and it was because of Mickey Joseph. It was because of this staff coming together. That is fact. So 3-6 doesn't tell the whole story, but it may for some ADs. What are Mickey Joseph's strengths? Communication, connection. Mickey Joseph's strengths is recruiting, incredible talent, but getting a lot out of that talent. And Mickey Joseph's strength is just being absolutely 100% direct with you, the player, and coaching you hard. There's no BS with Mickey. So he's super appealing. We're closer to it. Is he somebody that Florida Atlantic should look at? Yes. UNLV, UAB, Liberty, Tulsa. Tulane's not going to be open. Texas State, Western Michigan. Those are jobs that are open that Mickey should be considered for. As far as a Power 5, Stanford, Georgia Tech is going to use their interim. Cincinnati's open. There's Colorado. There's South Florida, probably going to Deion. There's Charlotte. What does Mickey want to do? Mickey wants to get paid, okay? And does Mickey want to be a head coach? Probably. Does Mickey want to be a head coach at one of these other spots? And he's moved around, but he's primarily been in Louisiana, he's been in Mississippi, and he came back home to Nebraska. Okay? So do you want to go set up shop at 55, making, I don't know what UNLV pays, $2 million, 1.5. You got to look at it if you're Mickey Joseph, what's best for me and my family and my coaching career. Mickey Joseph has coached for over 30 years, and he's crawled his way up because he's a grinder. Mickey Joseph did not start making real, air quote, real college football money till 2016 when he got to LSU, and that was probably $500,000 or $550,000. Okay, he got a bump to come to Lincoln at 6.
Well,
and then
you got a bump following the national championship season a little bit. I think it went from like 5 to 550.
Yeah, so Mickey's done fine, but I have no earthly clue what he made at Louisiana Tech for a year, or at Elkhorn State, or go down the list of some of the smaller schools. I don't know what that salary structure is. 40 grand, 100 grand, 150, and it's not all about money. I mean, he's a teacher, he's a coach, he's a people person, but you need to be compensated for your worth. LSU right now pays, and I don't know their receivers coach, but their receivers coach is the highest paid wide receivers coach in college football, the guy that replaced Mickey at $1 million. Okay? I think Mickey's probably top 5, top 6. Can you come to based on your salary pool of $7 million? You still got to pay a defensive coordinator. You still got to round out your staff. But can you put a price tag? Can you honestly put a price tag on peace of mind? I'm fairly certain Mickey and Rhule meant this morning. I would think Mickey has got some offers to field as a receivers coach, as maybe as a court. He's never called plays, though. That's it. I mean, if you're going to get a head job in college football, you need to be a coordinator.
Not necessarily.
More times than not,
yes.
A position coach does not get hired. Dabo Swinney, okay? That's it. And then Mickey Joseph is interim or defensive coordinator a lot of times, right? More times than not, you've got to have been a coordinator or a former head coach to get another head coaching job.
But he had the experience as an interim. Now, I don't think that's going to pop him up to a Power 5 job right now. That's why we've listed off some group of 5 teams. But he has that experience there, and I think with that in the back pocket, you could remain a wide receivers coach, and if you do really, really well, you can get a head coaching opportunity. And if I'm Mickey Joseph, I'm looking around college football, and as you said, top 5, top 10 type wide receivers coach in the country. I look at a guy at Ohio State and Brian Hartline, a guy who is nailing their recruiting year in, year out, the lead offensive recruiter for Ohio State. He's also their passing game coordinator now, and bar none, one of the best wide receivers coaches in the country. So
he's a guy that comes to your mind that could be a head coach somewhere.
He could be a head coach somewhere, and that's another guy I look at. If I'm Mickey Joseph and I say, I think I'm like that guy. I think I deserve to make what that guy makes.
What's Hartline pulled on?
$950,000 a year.
Okay.
And that's, I think, the number that Mickey Joseph should probably realistically be asking for from Nebraska, at least $900,000. Which is, it's a big chunk of change for Matt Rhule. It's a big another consideration here. Whenever you have $7 million to spend, do you want to give almost $1 million a year to a wide receivers coach? And right now, I'd say from an outside perspective, I say yes with the recruiting acumen that Mickey Joseph brings.
Well, and look at what he's put into the NFL. I mean, right? I mean, look at the guys starring on Sundays that were his guys. That's a little bit of proof for me, right? Go win ball games with those guys catching passes. Mm-hmm. So Mickey Joseph, I think, worst case gets a $200,000 to $300,000 raise to stay. If you're Matt Rhule, can you put a price tag on peace of mind? You want to win? You want to win soon? Well, O'Shawn Mathis, his tweet, talking to Mickey, leaning towards the NFL, waiting. I'm paraphrasing here, waiting to talk to Mickey, but leaning towards the draft. Mm-hmm. I think you got a ton of guys that will absolutely stick and stay if Mickey's back. And you can pay Mickey to come back, and O'Shawn can be one of those guys. Casey Thompson can be one of those guys if Mickey sticks and stays.
And then you add to the fact the recruiting class. It's going to make Matt Rhule's job a lot easier for the next 2 weeks if you have the base that Mickey Joseph has already built on your recruiting class.
It just kind of comes down to what Mickey wants to do.
Yes.
It is very important to the fan base that he's taken care of, unless he has a better opportunity to get that head coaching job. We'll talk with Mitch Sherman next on Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Thanks for spending time. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by Currency. Less than an hour, Matt Schick will join us, ESPN Radio, Sirius XM, Schick and Nick podcast. We welcome in Mitch Sherman from The Athletic, at Mitch Sherman on Twitter.
Star-studded lineup today.
We're working hard. Mitch, how we doing?
I'm still standing. That's about the best that I can say.
You and me both, but you've been hoofing it, man. You're awesome, great coverage, and thanks for sharing.
You have that espresso on an IV drip?
That's next. I've just been going regular coffee, but if things continue as they have for the last 36 hours, I'm going to be on an IV drip. Yes, one way or another.
We will make that happen. So we can start a lot of different spots. I want to get your thoughts on Coach Rhule and his introductory presser. Let's just start with 24 hours ago and your reaction, your impression here. And it was really good. The side sessions were really informative, not only from Trev, but also from Coach Rhule, with just this whole process, man. And it was touch and go is what it sounded like for this to actually get pulled off.
Yeah, and that is what is on my computer screen, is a large document that is pulling together that touch and go nature of the search and of the pursuit of Matt Rhule that Trev Alberts undertook over the last 2 months. And, really it does go back almost 2 months. And I recognize that Matt Rhule was employed by the Carolina Panthers until October 10th, but it's interesting to dig into it and recognize that Trev Alberts had his eyes on Matt Rhule even before that went down in Carolina. So, when he stands up there and says that Matt Rhule was candidate 1A, a lot of athletic directors say that, and I do believe it in this situation. Trev, it was not always looking like he was going to get his top guy, but he did at the end of this.
He did, and the dynamic here of Rhule and when he came back on the radar, and the merry-go-round of Nebraska's negotiating stance, Rhule's negotiating stance, and then the third party of Carolina, Mitch. I mean, this was a ton of work for Trev.
Yeah, the Panthers made it the most difficult, not necessarily because they were difficult, but they're not. They're not as invested in the situation, and they weren't as motivated to make this work as Nebraska was in looking for a coach and in trying to hit a home run with the hire, and in Matt Rhule's case, wanting to get back into the business, not sit on the sideline. And meanwhile, you have Carolina and a billionaire owner who doesn't have that same kind of urgency. So of the three parties that were working on this, it was certainly a challenge for Trev Alberts and for Matt Rhule to make it work with Carolina. But you had to do that, or this thing, it wouldn't have come together. So I think if it's a different kind of deal, and you're hiring a college coach, or you're hiring an NFL coach who doesn't have the $40 million buyout, then this thing would have come together in a different way. The good thing for Nebraska is that he's here now, and he's had time already to look at Nebraska and pay attention to what's going on. And now that he's on the ground in Lincoln, instead of trying to coach a bowl game with a college program or say goodbye to a college program like other coaches who are getting hired right now are doing, Matt Rhule's full 100% attention can be on Nebraska, on these players, and on figuring out his coaching staff and his recruiting plan.
Recruiting needs to hit the ground, and Rhule's already been working on that. You've got to have you can have a partial staff, but you have Barthel. It's been reported that he's Nebraska's new running backs coach. You've got pot roast, Knighton on the defensive line, and then Satterfield, and then Campbell and Foley. Those are the names we're hearing, along with Evan Cooper. What's your read on the Mickey situation?
I think it's fluid. And, this is like the coaching search all over again with candidates. And a week ago, I think we were talking about Matt Rhule being fluid and other coaches coming in and out of the mix. And is Lance Leipold still in this? It was just last Tuesday night that he signed the extension at Kansas. And, up until that point was a candidate at Nebraska, and Luke Fickell was coming onto the scene. And we see that was a real thing as Fickell goes and signs with Wisconsin on the day after Nebraska got Rhule. But that's where we are with Mickey Joseph in this situation. It's fluid, and he's had a conversation with Matt Rhule, and I don't believe that there has been a final determination made. But Mickey has some other things in the works, and the best thing for Mickey Joseph at the end of all of this would be for him to get a head coaching job. And I think Nebraska people should look at it that way too. Ultimately, when Mickey took over Nebraska and had 9 games, it was a tryout, and his best case scenario was to get the job at Nebraska, was to take Nebraska to a bowl game and do so much in those 11 weeks that he was the guy. And that obviously went a different direction for Nebraska. The next best scenario for Mickey Joseph in his career was for Mickey to find a job as a head coach at another program. And then you start to look at the possibility, and selfishly, Nebraska fans are going to want him on staff no matter what, but you also have to think about Mickey in this, and he wants to be a head coach. And I think these 9 games gave him a taste of what being a head coach can be like. So he's going to pursue those things, and he, of course, he's going to want to keep Nebraska as an option if that's something that Matt Rhule feels is a possibility. So I think it's still going to be a few days before, or at least a day, before we know exactly what's going on with Mickey and his future.
When it comes to Mickey and potential head coaching landing spots, I mean, there's been 17 gigs open. He's not been a coordinator, but he's an excellent recruiter, and his tryout, if you look at it, the way the team played is impressive. It's more impressive than their record with all that they went through injury-wise. But do you look at a Tulsa or a UNLV or a UAB? I mean, and I'm not sliding Mickey by not throwing out Stanford or Cincinnati or South Florida, but those places usually go to guys that have head coaching experience.
Yeah, I don't think I think you're barking up the right tree in the direction that you're going. I think UNLV and Tulsa and Tulane is a possibility, but the bigger jobs for sure. Athletic directors are going to be more apt to hire coaches who have with head coaching experience. Interestingly, I'm looking here. Well, yeah, Matt Rhule was an offensive coordinator for 3 years before becoming the head coach at Temple. I was going to say that he didn't have much coordinator experience, and he did 08 to 11 as Temple's offensive coordinator. So I don't think, though, that Mickey, in his lack of coordinator experience, is a detriment for him as a head coaching candidate, because he's going to be the type of head coach, if and when he gets a job, who delegates well. And he's not going, much like Matt Rhule. He had been an offensive coordinator, but I think Matt Rhule as a head coach in his previous college stops and with the Panthers was a head coach who delegated, and his own previous experience as an offensive coordinator was not essential to what he did as a head coach. So in that way, I think Joseph and Rhule are somewhat similar, and it shouldn't be held against Mickey as he goes for head coaching positions that he's only been an assistant coach or an associate head coach in the case of what he did at Nebraska, and of course a head coach for the last 9 games at Nebraska, which certainly helps his candidacy anywhere.
Mitch Sherman's with us here on Hail Varsity Radio. And Mitch, do you have a read or a guess on a timetable for Mickey's decision? And what's complicated here is the coaching carousel is a fickle beast. You don't quite know when it's going to stop spinning, and that's what kind of leads to some question marks and why this could be a little bit up in the air. But do you have a timetable on when this drama could end, maybe by the end of the week?
I think so. I think that's a fair assessment. It could end sooner. He could get an offer from Rhule sooner. He could part ways with Nebraska without another job necessarily sooner. I think those are both on the table. Or he could get picked up as a head coach. There's just a number. Those are 3 directions right there that it could go. But I don't think it's going to be a real long process. There's also the possibility that he could catch on somewhere and then become a head coaching candidate as jobs open later in this cycle. So not out of the question for coaches to latch on and then to move before they ever spend a day on the sideline at that school. Not to say that happens often, but in the case of somebody like Mickey, who is potentially a head coaching candidate and an assistant coaching candidate, he would be in the small category of coaches who could end up in a scenario like that.
Mitch, some of the names that were on Frost's staff, do you feel like a guy like Bush or Becton have a shot? Rude? I mean, what's your feel with any potential holdover?
Well, Bush is not going to be on the staff. I do know that. The others, I don't know. I guess I don't expect it. So that's about as. And I haven't talked to those guys. I don't know what's going on with Barrett Ruud or with Sean Becton, but I don't expect it. You see the pattern that's developing here with the coaches that Matt Rhule is hiring, and a lot of these guys have worked with him at various stops. And I think most of his staff is going to fit that category. Perhaps not everyone. So maybe there'll be an opportunity for somebody who's a holdover from Nebraska. Maybe there'll be an opportunity for him to bring in somebody from the outside that got a strong recommendation and hasn't worked with him at one of his previous places as a head coach, or maybe he'll go deeper into his past and find somebody that he worked with on the assistant coaching level. I don't know, but as it relates to any specific Nebraska assistant, I don't think the outlook is real optimistic. Not to say that one couldn't emerge through this.
Mitch Sherman's with us on Hail Varsity. Mitch with The Athletic at Mitch Sherman. Mitch, about 15 seconds, bud. What can folks look forward from you here in the near future?
Well, as I said, we are putting together the story on all that happened in the search and trying to get as much information as we can about where it went and how it went, both with Rhule and other directions that Trev Alberts looked. We know that Rhule was his top candidate, but that doesn't mean, Trev said it, there were 13 candidates. So getting to the bottom of some of that, I think it's a fascinating process to look at a 76-day search and try to uncover as much as possible that happened during that period.
Mitch, thanks for the time. Good to spend a few minutes with you.
All right. Take care, guys. Thanks.
There is Mitch Sherman.
Chime in 402-466-ESPN or email the show, Chris@HailVarsity.com.
Just try me.
Back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you. It's Hail Varsity, presented by Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Some insightful stuff there from Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. And some of you might be rolling your eyes, Schmidt, why you asking about the former staff. This is new. This is Rhule. This is how things go. Absolutely. But you have couple of guys in Bush and Becton that have been long time guys, and they've been to various spots. Becton more so Central Florida for most of his career, but I asked about him just because of what you've seen performance-wise, not only on the recruiting trail from Becton in the southeast part of the U.S., but also the position coach that's built up a guy. And I know Fedoni's been injured, but Becton's done a really nice job of getting a hold of some in-state talent tight ends, and I know some have gotten away as well.
But look at the development within that room.
His development.
Austin Allen, Travis Vokalek. I'd even add Borkacher to that list this season.
Well, and then you've got Chancellor.
Chancellor Brewington's been phenomenal for 2 years.
And then you've got some young pups that are on the way. The kid out of Creighton Prep.
Rollins.
Yeah, big old Rollins. I mean, Nebraska's had really good tight end play, and a lot of that credit goes to Becton. And I think Becton, we talk a lot about coaches and evaluation and a set of eyes. I mean, Becton's been doing it for a long time. Becton's a guy and he got retained last year. He was the only offensive coach to get retained. And he has an eye for talent and projection.
And let's also discuss the fact, I mean, some people have said, well, let's not talk about the old guys, to your point, because let's let Matt Rhule bring in his staff.
And that's totally fair.
That's fair, but I'd also add that Matt Rhule doesn't really have a staff. It's not like you're going and plucking a sitting head coach that has a staff fully assembled. His staff from Temple and Baylor scattered. A bit when he went to the Panthers. Some followed him to Carolina. You had one or two stick around at Baylor. You had some guys head off elsewhere to Texas A&M and other places. So it's not like he has a cohesive staff that is now out of a job. I mean, if you're going to go try to get the band back together, you got to go pluck guys from some good jobs. And one guy I think of is Elijah Robinson down at Texas A&M, the interior defensive line coach. And could he be coming? Maybe, but Texas A&M isn't a bad gig right now with how their recruiting looks. Jimbo Fisher might be on the hot seat, but his buyout is humongous. And
dude, if he goes 4-8, 5-7 next year, if he's not 9-3 next year, they're gonna pop him.
But are you gonna leave that gig with the great recruiting that Texas A&M has for a program that, frankly, has been down in the dumps for 5 years now? If not longer.
Well, but it comes down to who do you like? Who would you prefer to work for? Do you want to keep working for Psycho Jimbo, or do you want to come back to work for Rhule? And Elijah Robinson is a get. That's a guy you go get if you're Nebraska. Absolutely. The Mickey factor, though, and the way Mitch talked, I mean, Mickey's going to have some opportunities and options. And listen, I know I was talking about coordinator experience, but yeah, there is the head coach, like a Switzer. Now, Switzer had coordinating experience, but Barry is a motivator. Mm-hmm. Barry had an eye for talent, and Barry was a closer, right? So was T.O., and T.O. had an eye for talent and development. And you need to go get a guy that can see high-level talent and then project that into reality by coaching and training and meetings and obviously practice field performance. So I look at I bring up Bill Bush because of who he's delivered. And if he's not on staff anymore, per Mitch Sherman, then that's too bad. But we love us some Bill Bush. Great dude, tremendous recruiter, and appreciate his time at Nebraska. There are comps out there that you know that have worked with you, and that's the route Rhule's going to go. But the Mickey situation is, all right, let's figure out here by the end of the week, are you going to take a gig at Tulsa or Tulane or UNLV or UAB? Because, man, you've been working your butt off for 3 decades to get a shot at being a head coach. And you've got to go after that at this point in your career at age 54, going to be 55. You can't fault him for that. You applaud him for that. It'd be easy to come, stay in Lincoln, collect the check, and keep doing your thing here. And he may figure this is the best spot for me. I'm happy. I chose a second time to come to Lincoln. But, man, think about it. Getting the taste of being a head coach and doing good work and then having your own thing God, that'd be fun for him.
But there's a risk versus reward element right now with Mickey Joseph in this decision because Matt Rhule, let's be honest, he needs an answer, and he needs an answer yesterday because of the recruiting.
He also understands because he just played the leverage game himself.
He also understands, but you also, if you're him, you know you need an answer as soon as possible. And you're going to give Mickey Joseph a little leeway if you really do want him.
Sure.
But you're also going to need an answer. And Mickey is going to have to look at this and say, do I want a guaranteed job with Nebraska that's probably giving me somewhere probably close to $1 million? I don't think that's a stretch to say that's what Mickey Joseph deserves.
It needs to be.
So you have to sit there and say, do I want to take the opportunity I know is right here that is guaranteed to me, or do I want to take my chances? And Matt Rhule goes and hires a different wide receivers coach, and now I'm hanging in the wind here saying, well, I'm going to go apply for head coaching gigs. If I don't get it, where do I end up? Am I a wide receiver coach at someplace lesser than Nebraska? Is somebody else going to fire their sitting wide receivers coach to bring me in? There's a lot more question marks if you decide to go test the waters of being head coach if you don't get the job where Nebraska will be the guarantee because reading the tea leaves here, Matt Rhule really wants Mickey Joseph, and I'm inclined to believe that there's some momentum headed that way to Mickey Joseph sticking around. But that's got to be the question floating through Mickey's mind right now is, do I go with the guaranteed option of Nebraska that's going to get me paid, or do I go take a chance on myself and run the risk of trying to get a head coaching gig? And if I don't get that head coaching gig, my opportunity might not be as good as it would have been at Nebraska.
What's going to make him the happiest? Being able to run his own program, or okay, you got passed over in a tough situation, and I mean it's the same thing with Jimbo Leonard. I mean, look at him. He can make a fortune staying at Wisconsin, and quite frankly, their transfer portal numbers depend on him staying. And the guy Jim Leonard's pissed at is his AD, McIntosh, not Luke Fickell. Okay, Fickell's he's the coach now, but he was the messenger, right? Or he's who you got dumped for. I think it's real hard for Leonard to stay at Wisconsin. And does he go get a head gig at one of these spots? Because that's the thing. And does he want to go to a G5 and start out there? Does he go to a Western Michigan? Now, if you're a Power 5, I don't maybe he's getting phone calls made to Stanford, but does he know that area? He's a Wisconsin guy. That's the other part of this. Like Mickey knows the Sun Belt region, and he knows Lincoln. I mean, if you're a Nebraska fan and Mickey makes the decision that, you know what, I'm happier. I really would love being a head coach, but man, I'm happy as a position coach, getting a raise, and then just dominating in-state recruiting. I mean, put him in charge of the state and beyond. I mean, he's tireless at recruiting. This will be fascinating to see what happens and what shot Mickey has as a head coach at some different spots.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time this hour, Matt Schick, ESPNU, Sirius XM, ESPN Radio, Schick and Nick podcast coming up here in 10 minutes. His take on Rhule, the college football world, and some U.S. soccer. Iran, not Iran, Iran. But you can call it whatever you want now because you won.
Wait, is this our U.S. soccer segment?
It's our U.S. soccer 30 seconds. You're going to be crushing... Don't. you're gonna be slamming tall boys about 10:30 on Saturday morning, aren't you?
7 a.m. as soon as I show up here.
Okay.
I'm kidding.
Well, you do you. I mean, I'm not going to judge. But Animal and the crew, I'm sure, are going to be rocking and rolling downtown in the Haymarket.
Oh yeah,
for some soccer
and
coverage.
I hopefully will be able to go visit them after we finish up this show on Saturday. Maybe I'll text Connor and see if he wants to work a Saturday morning show.
Well, just make it more the merrier. Throw us down there with him.
Let's do it.
Roadshow. Well, reach out to your soccer peeps.
I don't have any soccer peeps. Really.
Just to not make it awkward. I don't want to, go Jim Leonard all fickle here. Do you want me to sit over by the ficus? Since we're sharing an office right now. Let's tell you about your friends at Red Zone Tickets. You have tickets to buy or sell. You can't go or you want to go. Hey, Husker volleyball in action for the NCAA tournament. And, of course, Creighton basketball, man, they keep climbing in the ratings. Options for you with Red Zone Tickets, concerts or theater seats, How about the College World Series? RedZoneTickets.com is where you log on, and they are Omaha proud, selling funds since 2001. An A-plus Better Business Bureau rating. They're your local source, Red Zone Tickets, and they have that 100% guarantee on all orders. Get that bucket list crossed off and create the memories that last a lifetime. RedZoneTickets.com. RedZoneTickets.com today. Deion Sanders, Boulder, South Florida. Where will prime time be?
Next question goes to Kendrick Marshall.
Yeah, Coach. Over the weekend, Pete Thelma with Fox Sports reported that Colorado had made you an offer to become their next head coach. Mm-hmm. How true is that report, and is there any mutual interest between you and the school?
Yeah, definitely. The report is true. They're not the only ones. The report is true. I'm not going to sit on here and tell all my business, but they're not the only ones. And I would be a liar if I told you they didn't. You know they did. I know they did. Everybody there know they did. So it is what it is. That's not my focus right now. My focus is to win and to be dominant, and then to not even to go on to the Celebration Bowl. My focus is right here in this beloved stadium to be dominant on Saturday. That's my focus. And I keeps the main thing. And everyone that knows me know that about me. I have an innate ability to focus and keep the main thing.
As a follow-up, how do you not let these reports distract you from preparing for each week and preparing your team to play?
Well, to someone else that hadn't been that dude, it's intoxicating. I've been praying for a long time, dog. Attention ain't nothing new to me. It's like, come on. This is. I'm not being braggadocious or whatever. That's a wonderful word, isn't it? Braggadocious. Just came up with that. I think I said that a few weeks ago. But this ain't new to me. Being in the spotlight ain't new to me. I got to just turn that light and channel it to my kids, channel it to my coaching staff, channel it to the support staff. We've been in the spotlight for a long time individually. It's time to bring us collectively, and that's what I've been doing ever since I touched foot on this campus and into HBCU football.
I've been a big deal a hell of a lot a long time. I love his answer. Matt Schick, a big deal. Schick and Nick, ESPN, next hour 2 on the way with Hail Varsity.
Welcome to Hail Varsity Radio, the voice of Husker Nation. Insight, opinion, expertise, with the biggest and best names talking Nebraska across the state. Join the show on Twitter at Hail Varsity and at Schmidt_radio. Call in at 402-466-ESPN or 1-800-825-5865. Here's Chris Schmidt.
Back into it, it's hour 2. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. We say hi to Matt Schick with us, of course, Schick and Nick podcast. And you know him from ESPN Radio, Sirius XM, and ESPNU. Okay, do you have the Old Glory out as a cape right now? Are you racing around the backyard? The U.S. is advanced in the World Cup, Schick.
You know, this is going to be really sad for me to say, okay? And I love my country. I love everything. Don't love soccer, but I love my country. Proud to be an American. So don't take this the wrong way. But there is something about all of us rooting for the same team that just isn't as fun. You know, it's just not as fun. It's you can't trash talk at work. You know, you can't brag to your buddy. Like, we're all living here, you know, so it's like I don't get as into it as others, but I'm happy that we won. Does that make sense? Like, it doesn't change my life. It doesn't change my minute to minute. It's cool that we won, but man, you know, you get Colorado on the field against, an arch rival, and, I might feel something different.
No, I get you. Now, if you work at a place that has a coworker from another country and you start talking around the water cooler and you just pray he's not an obsessed soccer hooligan, you don't get stabbed in the neck. I mean, it could go sideways.
It could. That's why, you just have to tread lightly, whether he's a fan of a soccer team from another country or, he's an Auburn fan, right? I mean, it's
all You are correct, sir. Careful with SEC fan you tick off at work.
That's it. Make sure you don't have any. Those non-conference games can really be treacherous to work, you know.
Well, every time we'd go to Boulder, and it's turned into non-conference, but I'm going to say you guys, and I don't mean it that way, but you.
That's fine. That's fine.
Somebody,
you guys.
Somebody have to come back, and they need a new paint job or a new set of tires, or someone to take a tire iron to the windshield. I mean, you guys were really good at making people run for the border back to Nebraska back in the day. Oh man.
Oh yeah. Well, it's like you could say, hey, you know, be careful in this other country. You know, when you're rooting for this team or that team, or you declare you're an American, like, don't worry about it. I'm a Nebraska fan. I've been to Boulder in an away game. I'm fine. I get it. Okay, I know how bad this can be. I've gone through the fire, and we'll figure this out. Yeah, those were great days. Those were just really fun days, especially for your deductible. It was good fun.
Well, speaking of money, a boatload of it spent on Matt Rhule. $74 million over 8 years, whatever. Carolina got kicked back as well. And then the assistant pool is $7 million. So a big-time investment by Trev. But, Matt, really interesting press conference yesterday. Alignment, the word of the day. But seems like Nebraska, as we're used to doing this here every 5 years in the state, can take a step forward, and I think Rhule hit all the right notes yesterday.
Yeah, he did. You kind of learned that you can't put a price tag on winning, right? I mean, you could have said $150 million, and Husker fans like, well, does it mean we're going to win a championship? Yeah, okay, fine. Where do I sign the check, even though it's not coming out of my coffer? I mean, you can only lose so much before you stop tightening the wallet. But yeah, I thought, you know, and going in, and I've said time and again when he was fired here in Charlotte, tweeted it out, just felt, you know, he should be number one on the list for a lot of different reasons. I remember watching his news conference here in Charlotte and just being blown away by just how he commanded the room and how great he was. And I've said, you know, him and Trev would be a great duo, pulling in the right direction and winning over people. And of course, you know, winning the press conference is one thing. Winning the Big Ten conference is something completely different. But we don't have any games right now, so that's all you can do. But you're right about hitting the right notes. And, you know, from line of scrimmage to Husker tradition to family. I mean, I don't know who gave him the rundown about the right things to say, but as the son of a pastor, he probably didn't need too much help. And I just, you know, the things I've liked the most about him is that, you know, I was asked on KETV, our buddy Andy Kendi asked me the night before, you know, what advice would you give to Matt Rhule? And mine was just be yourself, be authentic, be available, and let people know that you care. And, you know, he's out to dinner. You read he's out to dinner last night in Lincoln. He's hanging out. He's not shying away from anybody, at least not yet. You know, when you lose a few games, you might want to go inside a little bit more often. But he's undefeated right now. He's vulnerable. He's available. He's authentic. And you go online and see how he talked about, you know, he gave us talk about how he was ready to give up on his marriage. I mean, that's a far cry from anything you've heard over the last 10 years in that football office about letting people know exactly who you are and that you're one of them, and you might be rich, but you're not perfect. So there's a lot of good things there that I think can help you get through the off season and get you to spring ball if you're a Husker fan.
Now, Matt, whenever I listened back to his presser yesterday, it really does strike me, and I think this was the initial impression, but it just strikes me how good of a speaker he is. He did hit all the right notes, and I keep coming back to is that lip service or is that actually what he believes? Because he is such a gifted speaker, but then I sit back and I also try to quantify the fact that, you know what, being a gifted speaker is really important whenever you're at a high-level Power 5 gig like Nebraska. So what's your take on just that, the gifted speaker versus, you know, going and proving it on the field?
Well, I mean, you know, you can be a gifted speaker and be a bad president. You can be a gifted speaker and be a bad football coach. You know, it's not a given for anything. But, you know, I will say that I think with the things about him is that, you know, if someone had something bad to say about him, they would have said it by now. if a former player had a bad time and a bad experience with Matt Rhule, you would have heard it by now. And that doesn't mean that he's going to do everything right. He might be the son of a preacher, but he's not God. He's not perfect. So he's got to figure this thing out, and he's going to have a bunch of missteps. But I said on our Schick and Nick podcast a while ago, I said, when this next head coach is hired, no matter who it is, because you were kind of going down the list of candidates, I said, you're going to be so refreshed, and I think I said especially if it's Matt Rhule, but talking about other candidates as well. It's going to be so refreshing to hear a coach up there who sounds like a head coach. And I said that even after Big Ten Media Days, when things were going south for Scott Frost. You reflect on Big Ten Media Days and just how everyone sounds like a head coach except Scott. And that doesn't mean he's not a good coach. It does mean that the first impression isn't great. And if you're going to recruit and you're going to win over prospects, you're going to win over the fans, you're going to win funds, and raise money, you got to be able to have a good first impression. And I think that's where Matt Rhule hits a home run.
Matt Schick with us from ESPN, Sirius XM, the Schick and Nick podcast, and find him on Twitter at ESPN_Schick. I think that the communication part is vital, and that's one thing to be able to do it when the cameras are on, but Rhule, so based on his builds and based on his turnarounds, has been able to communicate to not only his position coaches, his assistant head coach, but also the players have bought in, and then they've figured out his plan, and they've won in short order. What's your feel on Nebraska right now? Say, let's just play this game for a second. Say Mickey comes back, they give him a hefty raise, and it's the best he's going to do financially, and it outweighs a potential head coaching job somewhere else, assuming he would get said head coaching job with no coordinator experience. So say Mickey's taken care of, you got majority of the roster that returns. What could year one look like for Rhule? What should year one look like with that part of the equation we've just spelled out?
Well, I did interview Johnny the Jet Rogers this morning, and he assured me that Mickey's coming back. So I know he said that to everybody, but he assured me personally that he's coming back, that it's a done deal. So take that to the bank with Johnny the Jet Rogers. So let's assume that what you're saying with Mickey is correct. I think what that does is it alleviates attrition, because when you have a new head coach, I'm wondering what's going to go on at Wisconsin, how much attrition you're going to have, especially if Jim Leonard's not involved moving forward. But the fact that Matt Rhule talked to Scott Frost and talked about, hey, what coach or two or what coaches should I keep an eye on, the fact that he's already met with Casey Thompson. Now, Matt Rhule's not an idiot. He knows, like, hey, I need that quarterback, and he was pretty good. And, do I want door number 3, or do I want the given known quantity of a guy who could probably get me to a bowl game? So I think the attrition aspect is going to be the key about all of this. But let's assume everything you said is right. This wasn't a great roster, but it had enough pieces to get to a bowl game. But with a new offensive playbook, there's going to be learning curves. How is he going to, mold the system to his players versus square peg round hole? All of those types of things that he talked about at the dais that would lead you to believe that he's not gonna sacrifice tomorrow for today, but he's also not gonna make sure that his system is in place, even if it means losing a ton of games, because the kids understand and the recruits get it that the tradition is what you did last week, not last century. And so you need to win. And winning is really important, and showing progress is important. And so I think his patience will be balanced with his passion for winning. And I think my realistic expectation was kind of like what it was last year and kind of like what it was the year before. This team should have been to a bowl game this year, and it should have been to a bowl game in Scott Frost's penultimate season. And so I think that's realistic expectations going in. I also think this, though, that if Matt Rhule played it smart, they'd play very competitive and win like 5 games. Like that would be the ideal scenario for Matt Rhule, because the last thing you want to do is set the bar too high. Look at Mel Tucker. Look at Brady Hoke. Baby steps, baby. And with the transfer portal, the patience wears thin pretty quickly. But I think a bowl game is fairly conceivable, and frankly, it should be the minimum.
Matt Schick is with us here on Hail Varsity Radio. And Matt, I want to talk about the other big hire of the weekend. That's Luke Fickell, because there's always going to be the comparison between the two based on the timing of the hires, the same offseason, the same weekend, really. And we can assume, sitting here based on timing and based on contract numbers, that Matt Rhule was the pick over Luke Fickell. And can't confirm that, but that's kind of reading in between the lines on the situation. And I want to get your take. It's a two-part question, and it could be the same answer from you. Which hire do you think has more wow factor from a national perspective? And then to follow that up, which hire do you think personally is better fit for the program where they're at right now?
Well, I would say in terms of fit and need, it's probably Rhule, because you needed a builder. But in terms of the wow factor and how the heck did they pull that off, I don't think it's any question that it's Luke Fickell. Luke Fickell wasn't even like top 12 on BetAG or Bet.ag, whatever those sorry, guys, I don't bet, even though it's kind of a lie. I don't know those websites. But top 12 coaching prospects for Wisconsin, he wasn't even in the betting roll for that. He wasn't on the radar. And so the fact that a Luke Fickell turned down Michigan State when Mel Tucker got the gig tells you that that's a pretty good hire, and one that I think, based on his track record and his recent success, I mean, delivering a conference, not only a team to a playoff, but a conference to a Power Five, that's a wow factor for me. And so in terms of fit, it feels like Rhule with what he's saying and what Nebraska needs. But in terms of the wow factor and the more impressive hire that they pulled it off, I would say it's Fickell.
Auburn and Hugh Freeze, you know the SEC well. Hugh's been really good wherever he's been on the field, and they've won ball games. What Hugh Freeze is headed to the Plains at Auburn? Are they gonna be able to be back at it on the field in short order under him? And do you think he's rehabbed?
Well, I think he'd better be rehabbed. I think if you can't get rehabbed with the public ostracization that happened to him over the last 5 to 10 years, then I'm not sure how you're ever going to figure it out. Yeah. I know he's a self-professed man of faith, and that certainly doesn't mean you're perfect. That's why you find faith, because you are far from perfect. But at the same time, you do pay prices for your transgressions, and there are consequences. I think he's paid those. I think as long as he comes to the job with a humble spirit and a servant's heart, I think that'll win some people over. But I think, back to the on-field stuff, the attrition aspect, I think, gets alleviated by keeping Cadillac Williams. Again, he's not an idiot. He understands, hey, this guy was really good, won some games, won over the locker room, and he can help me win more games, kind of like the Mickey and Rhule aspect. So, and maybe the Leonard Fickell aspect if he stays on. So, but I think, there's not a long list of people that have beaten Nick Saban more than once, and Hugh Freeze is on that list. So I think he'll be fine, and I just wonder, it's just an awful setup there at Auburn. You're asking someone to cook a meal, and there's 38 chefs in there fighting over the ingredients. Like that's just how it goes. And so you got to find a quarterback. They didn't have one this year. They don't have one on the roster. But again, the transfer portal, NIL, you can fix that pretty quickly.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Matt Schick with us, of course, Schick and Nick podcast. And you know him from ESPN Radio, Sirius XM, and ESPNU. Matt, is it fixable in Madison for Leonard?
Well, it's certainly going to be awkward. I said that today on the Sirius XM show that I do. It's just so stinking awkward for him and Luke Fickell. And Luke is saying, hey, I'd like to coach this team in the bowl game, but not be the head coach. Maybe I'll coach punters. Maybe I'll coach D-line. It's like, how do you do that? how do you do that when you've got Jim Leonard, the guy who you beat for the job, is the, quote, head coach for one more game? Is this his last audition for another job or before he jumps ship? That situation is so tenuous that I just wonder, and with the ease of player movement with the portal, I wonder what that looks like. I can't see Leonard going to Nebraska. I can't see that. I think Luke Fickell and them will do whatever they can to keep him if they want him. But Luke Fickell being a defensive guy, do they even see things the same way? Are they even in alignment? We talk about that key buzzword from Matt Rhule. So it's hard to imagine him staying, and it's hard to imagine this next month going very smoothly. But you haven't heard a peep from Leonard, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe he's got to just keep quiet for another week or so, because his silence can also be auditioning for another job. And the last thing you want him to be is a bad apple and sour grapes about this whole thing. He'll land on a sweet somewhere. I can't see him staying there. I really can't.
College football playoff and championship weekend. We'll get there before we get you out. Matt Schick with us. And first, let's talk playoff. And where do you believe Ohio State and Alabama are at? You've had some of the who's who fade in the SEC, some tough finishes to the year for a couple of schools. Ohio State got absolutely annihilated again by Michigan. So they're not what they once were. The top four are set right now, but all right, who's knocking on the door? Who do you think the fifth best team is, or the sixth best team? Who's threatening that playoff spot?
Yeah, I think it's Ohio State. I think they're the fifth best team. I think the knee-jerk coming out of the game against Michigan was, how could you have them even on the cusp? But if you go back and watch the game, if you go back and look at the box score, down to down, Ohio State was fine. Down to down, they were right there with Michigan. And I know it's bad to say, hey, there's 5 big plays. That's not sustainable for Michigan if they were to play again. You can't count on big plays, especially if you're Michigan. It's like, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? Yeah, I get it, but that's why they won. So I get all of that. But on a down-to-down basis, that Ohio State was just as good, if not better than Michigan. It looked in that first half that Ohio State was going to pull away, and then they just couldn't finish. Coach Day, Coach Scared. It was not a good performance, and Michigan from the neck up was very loose. And so I say all of that to say that Ohio State's resume is better than Alabama's. Frankly, you could make the argument that Tennessee's resume is better than Alabama's. Alabama might be 2 plays away from being undefeated. They're also 2 more plays away from having 4 losses. So their resume doesn't look great. Their wins aren't looking as good. Ole Miss has hit the cliff. Even their loss to LSU doesn't look as good anymore. So I think there's a lot of things there that point to Ohio State. And frankly, I get the people who say, hey, if US, the top 4 should be the same coming out of this weekend, no matter what. They want to say that before these games are played? What if USC gets pounded at the line of scrimmage by Utah? And you're going, okay, this doesn't look very good. How's this team going to fare against Georgia as a 4 seed? Get out of here. So, I get it, but I would also say that I think Ohio State is better than USC. Ohio State would probably fare better than USC, and that if USC were to slip up, I would not really hesitate to put to put Ohio State in there. And then if TCU were to slip up, I still think you put TCU up there. I think their strength of record is the best in the country, if not top 2. And I don't think they should be punished. But again, it's like the old coach Bo Pelini used to say, not what you do, but how you do it. And it's hard to make blanket statements today when we haven't seen the games yet. So let's see how it all plays out. But I will say this. We have 2 conference championship games that kind of matter because of this 4-team playoff, because, the other teams can lose and still get in. In a 12-team playoff, they're all going to matter. And I'm excited for that. As much as people say, you diminish the regular season with too much playoff inclusion. Well, these conference championship games, by and large, don't mean a whole lot year after year. And I think that would be a great breath of fresh air when conference championship weekend means you win and you're in. And I think that would add a little spice to it.
Well, Matt, let's go to the conference championship weekend and start with the game that you were talking about just a little bit earlier. It's USC and Utah Friday night kickoff, and I'm not going to ask you to predict a score. I'm not going to ask you to predict against the spread. Just your gut feeling on who gets the win, USC Utah.
Well, I'll say USC simply because Cam Rising just has not been playing well. It's really surprising too. Utah was one of my preseason top 4 teams to make the playoffs. So I'm pretty surprised that they have no shot going into this game. If you would have said that at the end of the beginning of the season, they won by a 2-point conversion at Rice-Eccles. This will be neutral field in Vegas. This will be a little bit different. You got Caleb Williams playing out of his mind, the defense playing a little bit better. It's hard to pick against USC based on the wave of momentum, but I also know that when teams have a lot on the line, we've seen Pac-12 teams in the past look at Oregon, look at others in the past 2 or 3 or 4 years, Utah even. You have an opportunity and you blow it. And so things get a little tight, and so I think Utah will go in there with absolutely nothing to lose. They're the more physical team, and I think they're going to make USC earn everything they've got. But I would like Utah to win just for the chaos, so that the selection committee's biggest decision isn't just the flavor of cream cheese on the bagel on Sunday morning, but actually a football conversation about who should be included. But I think USC will take care of it.
Matt Schick with his Schick and Nick podcast with Hurrdat Media, of course, Sirius XM and ESPN with us here, Hail Varsity Radio. Schick, we'll get you out here on this, but do you give LSU much of a shot here for an upset?
No, and I didn't give them a shot 4 weeks ago, even after they beat Alabama, and people were running their mouths about what if they beat Georgia. It's like, why is LSU viewed as this elite-level team? Because they beat a fallible Alabama team on a 2-point conversion? I get it. They're riding a little wave of momentum, but it's, Georgia, the gap between Georgia and Michigan, I don't think is incredibly sizable, but the gap between Georgia and like the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th best team, I think is, especially in the trenches. And so I would be stunned. I would be more stunned if LSU beats Georgia than if Purdue beats Michigan. I'll put it that way.
Wow. Well, that's where I was going to go next, Schick, and this is probably where we'll get you out. Does Purdue stand a chance, A, and B, if they do somehow pull off a miraculous victory, what kind of chaos would that cause to college football?
Well, I guess the only chaos it would cause is if they pounded Michigan, which isn't going to happen. I think Michigan's playing with a mulligan here. I think they're in no matter what. I think maybe it changes what color jersey Michigan's wearing in the playoff if Purdue wins or loses, if Purdue wins that game. I think that the cool thing about Purdue in its first appearance is that Jeff Brom can scheme some things. Purdue's going to be able to move the ball a little bit. I'm always interested in teams that are just coming off this emotional, huge win over a rival and how that looks 7 days later, let alone with the point spread, but just straight up, a Purdue team that kind of backed its way in and is now playing with house money, a very experienced quarterback, a very good wide receiver in Charlie Jones, a very good running back in Devin Maccabee, and a defense that, I don't know if they'll be able to hold up, but are they going to be going against Blake Corum or not? So I do give Purdue an opportunity here because they'll share the field with them. But, Michigan will win the game, but it wouldn't shock me if they have to sweat it out a little bit. But I don't think it'll have any impact on the playoffs.
Matt Schick with us. Find him on Twitter at ESPN_Schick. Matt, thanks for the time. We talked your ear off. Always had some fun. Thanks for giving us a few minutes.
Anytime, guys. Go USA. Be careful.
Matt Schick with us, Hail Varsity Radio at ESPN_Schick. And well, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? Oh, that was good. That was so funny. Man, good resource. College football playoff, another reveal happening. It'd be really cool for the Big Ten to get 2 teams in. As down as the Big Ten's been this year, I mean, the West has been completely 180 from what it was last year, where you had 5 9-win teams a season ago. Northwestern blew out a majority of their staff today. Some longtime assistants, because he's one of, Fitz is one. The only win they had, man, Nebraska, 1-11 this year. From a playoff standpoint, what Michigan did without Corum and with those 4 big plays, it's more of a mentality and attitude. and this is year 2 in a row with what Michigan's done to Ohio State. Ohio State can out-athlete about anybody, and Ohio State can get away with, and they're not as soft this year as they were last year when they got trounced in the snow.
Last year they were Sherman Ultra Soft.
Yes. Just faster than you, and they can bubble it. But, I mean, their philosophy's got to change. We talk a lot about Nebraska and Rhule and stopping the run and being able to run the football. But Ohio State's going to have to get more in tune with that. As great as their skill people are and as good as their quarterbacks have been, when they made a run at the playoff to the championship game, it was downhill running, and it was Fields with a little bit of physical element in the quarterback run game.
Well, it's going to be really interesting to see tonight whether they drop below USC in the rankings. You'd think they would. You would think USC would take that 4 spot, Ohio State probably in 5, and LSU in... You can't drop LSU after a win, though. So,
well, they got whacked by a bad A&M team. LSU's going to free fall.
That is correct. I missed that game.
You're fine though. I mean, going into it, there was talk about LSU. I mean, they're a 3-loss football team.
But I mean, the question becomes now is, can Ohio State get that backdoor entrance into the college football playoff? They probably need a loss from USC.
I think, despite the strength of schedule, I think Ohio State's a better team than TCU. And if K-State knocks them off, they were up 18 points on them the first time. TCU gets knocked off, Ohio State could sneak in.
100%.
And they will over a 2-loss Bama team.
And the things to watch tonight are, where does Ohio State fall to, and can Michigan jump Georgia? I don't think so, but maybe.
No, Georgia's...
That's a good Ohio State team they just beat.
Georgia's pretty awesome.
Chime in 402-466-ESPN or email the show, Chris@HailVarsity.com.
Just try me.
Back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you, it's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. And questions on the StreamYard post still revolving around Mickey Joseph. Is he a candidate for a head coaching job? I believe absolutely. And if he truly isn't, it's his job, his agent's job, to make sure that leverage exists to get as much money here in Lincoln. So that's what everyone was wondering about yesterday. What's Mickey's future in Nebraska? And we're still wondering that question today. Mitch Sherman with us in Hour 1. Check that interview out, the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Hail Varsity Radio. You can either listen to the whole show or you can check the specific interviews with Matt Schick and, of course, Mitch Sherman.
And
the full show also on the YouTube channel, the Hail Varsity YouTube channel.
Another big talking point today, new running back coach for Nebraska. And we have Anthony Grant chiming in here on Coach Applewhite, saying, "Gonna miss you, Coach Applewhite. Love you, and you'll forever be a great dude to me." Also a mentor, with a couple of heart emojis, a 100 emoji, and then the fingers crossed emoji. So Anthony Grant wishes Coach Applewhite the best in his future ventures, and we'll see what is in store for Anthony Grant, whether it's going to be another season at Nebraska or elsewhere.
Well, in that... You have E.J. Barthel, Rivals reporting first, and Brady Altman's got a good story, so check that out, HailVarsity.com, our staff writer on the latest and most up-to-date staff movement. But Barthel looks to be the running backs coach for Nebraska, as UConn running backs coach Barthel hired away. Jim Mora Jr. had him there. Barthel, the director of player personnel at Temple, and then also recruiting coordinator at Penn State in 2016. There was some questions on Twitter about, hey, did Barthel recruit Micah Parsons? And no, I think Parsons was 2017, class of 2017, wasn't he?
I thought he was class of 2018. His recruiting blew up that summer of 2017. That would have been the summer after my senior year, but then his senior year was the 2017 football season.
Were you at Friday Night Lights with him?
I was the year before.
Okay.
That's how I remember so well, because I remember being like, man, that would have been cool to see that guy in person.
You got a guy running 4.3 that's a linebacker. Penn State never blitzed him. Dallas is sending him like a madman off the edge all the time.
Well, I understand it, though, because Micah Parsons was athletic enough that he didn't really need to blitz him. He could come downhill and fill the run, but he was more valuable with, as you talk about, that 4.3 speed. I think it's more 4.4, but go sideline to sideline in the Big Ten. Just stick him at middle backer, and
he was awesome.
Why waste him on a blitz whenever he can make a tackle for you on the near sideline, on the far sideline, up the middle? Like, he can tackle anywhere. So I understand it from Penn State.
I know, but I look at a beast. And listen, their defensive lines have always been really pretty good. So they didn't always need to blitz to get pressure. So novel thought, and we'll see. You know, the future for Bill Busch and Becton and a lot of these guys here on staff, and some of these guys came in to try and save the day in short order after changes a year ago. And Applewhite's one of those guys, and really always appreciated Applewhite, liked his recruiting prowess. And you got to kind of think back, too, on the recruiting trail. Matt Rhule and his folks at Baylor probably know a lot about Applewhite just because of Applewhite being at TCU. I mean, you're rivals, but you're recruiting against one another in the state of Texas. So Rhule must be pretty confident with what he can get and what he has recruiting connection-wise in Texas if Applewhite's not retained, because Applewhite was pretty instrumental with getting O'Shawn Mathis, and I know the ROI on O'Shawn wasn't as game to game, but man, was he huge. Was he big time in that fourth quarter against Iowa?
Yeah, and O'Shawn Mathis, I think in a better team, may have been able to be utilized a little bit differently if you can build a lead and force a Big Ten team into passing situations.
Let him go off the edge.
His strength was not in run, but if he specialized off the edge, he really did well. But I think this kind of gets back to Rhule's point he made yesterday, that he wants young, hungry guys to be his assistant coaches. And you look at that with Barthel. I mean, this is his first time jumping up, being a position coach at a Power 5, and Matt Rhule must have seen enough with him at Temple and then did great at UConn to think that he's ready for that jump up, and that's kind of been the story here. You look at Terrence Knighton, another younger guy who's looking to get that jump up into Power 5 assistant coaching, where it fits the bill. It fits the bill for what Matt Rhule says he wants, and you understand it. A young guy with hunger is going to be one of those guys that's willing to get up at 5 a.m. to get this thing going. And Matt Rhule was up at 5 o'clock this morning. I should say at the stadium at 5 o'clock this morning. We know because he tweeted out that picture of the national championships up on the East Stadium.
Barthel knows the Big Ten, or at least you would presume knows the Big Ten, to get the recruiting coordinator spot for a year at Penn State, and didn't last longer than a year. Don't know the backstory to that, but he's a guy that has East Coast connections, a guy that played at UMass, and Nebraska's going to hunker down. They're going to hit Florida. They're going to hit Texas. They're going to hit New Jersey. They're going to hit the East Coast, but they're also going to focus in state, and you need somebody for that. So in either an outside hire, or if Mickey's retained, his job is to do Nebraska. And his job is to hit the metro regions in Nebraska. There's great players outside the metro region as well, but Mickey obviously has that grasp down in Louisiana too. But Bill Busch, to me, is the 500-mile radius guy that you would think about keeping or find a spot for. Doesn't sound like that's the case per Mitch Sherman.
And I thought that Bill Busch would be a great look to bring back as an analyst. That was really my take here, because got married back in 2018 and spent the 1 year at LSU, and then his wife from Lincoln wanted to move back.
Look what he did for LSU. He brought him Joe Burrow, for God's sake.
That's what I'm saying. It seemed like a good fit to have Busch somewhere on
He was a
staff.
safeties coach for 3 years down at LSU.
And with how Matt Rhule likes to get two guys on your line of scrimmage on both ways, it kind of makes sense to have a guy double dip. You can be special teams and safeties, but Matt Rhule's got a vision. So if Mitch is correct and Bill Busch is not coming back, I'll be curious to see who fills that Bill Busch role, because, again, while you like what you have here, the whole point of bringing in new coaches, bringing in new life, and bringing in new voices.
Well,
new
go
ideas.
get wins.
Go get wins, exactly.
Go get wins. Does Rhule pull a Baylor move? Does he hire a high school coach on staff from the state of Nebraska?
It's difficult to say, and it might hinge on Mickey, because I think Mickey's a guy you trust to lock down the borders of the state of Nebraska and be good in recruiting in the state. But if you can't, then you might want to look that direction of getting somebody who's got connections. But I don't think Matt Rhule is worried about being able to win over the state of Nebraska, especially after how well he did at the press conference yesterday. I don't think that's a concern. And there's more legwork to do aside from winning a press conference. You got to go be doing all the things he was doing down at TCU, speaking at conferences, going and being, keynote speakers, visiting 7-8 high schools a day. There's a lot of legwork to be done, but I think if you can retain Mickey, you might not need to go get that high school coach in order to build up your.
We're just talking out loud. I mean,
exactly.
It'll shape together how it's supposed to shape together, but you're happy, a lot of you, Nebraska fan wise, that you got Rhule. Well, here's some more national reaction before we close down a Tuesday. On tomorrow's show, we'll get ready for Nebraska basketball. We'll spend more time on the college football landscape and the latest on Nebraska's coaching staff. And Mike Babcock will be with us. Evan Bland also joins the show. We'll wind down a Tuesday with Hail Varsity, presented by Currency.
Miss us?
Come here, brother. Give me a hug. Bring it in for the real thing.
We're on call for you. Catch the podcast at hailvarsity.com, the ESPN Lincoln app, or download them on iTunes.
Saddle up, partner.
Back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time, Hail Varsity Radio, presented by Currency for all your equipment financing needs. Go Currency. Numbers to dial up at 466-3776, 466-3776, 800-825-5865. Reminder to get buckled up, hands on the wheel, eyes and mind straight ahead. The driver is one job to drive. A message from the Nebraska Department of Highway Safety Office. You're hearing us in a lot of spots across the state. We appreciate you doing that. Also streaming, but winter weather advisory in Lincoln for another 5 minutes or so, and I haven't been outside yet, but man, I stepped outside to my grill cover flew off, and the two idiots, my two pups, the German and the Labradoodle, both love when Dad's grill cover gets loose because they rip the hell out of it. So it blew off, and I stepped on the top step. I have 3 steps to my patio.
You ate it.
And I freaking ate it. And I caught myself, but I mean, I looked like Willie Mays Hayes sliding into home plate off of Jake Taylor's bunt. If you remember the classic Major League, it was one of those last-second slides where it's a hook slide with that left foot, and the leg is not quite 90 degrees, but it's back, it's pinned, and I slid down, and all they did was they were both jumping up and down and then wagging their tail. They thought, they didn't laugh. I don't know if dogs can laugh, but man, they thought it was the funniest thing to see me eat it. Grill's covered, which is important, but
how's your health? That's more important.
I'm all right. I didn't know I was that flexible or stretchy, but I am. And I went out like a dumbass in bare feet. Like just you get home from the morning shift and I just take my shoes out. Oh, grill cover. Okay, pups are out. Grill cover's on the ground. They're going to destroy this thing. They're $50. Why'd it blow off? Anywho, and then
see, I swear it was less icy on this end of town as compared to your end of town,
dude.
I'm not sure. Maybe whenever you leave and work, like
it's a covered patio, and it was an ice rink.
See,
and I should have been cautious.
My house was not icy this morning, so I saw a lot of people around town posting like, "Oh, it's icy," and I didn't think it was bad at my house. Maybe it's just a different end of town type thing.
Wherever you're at, because you're getting snow in different spots around the state, be careful. That is our obvious advice. So, are you going to do short ribs here for Coach Pot Roast?
I might actually.
Are you going to fire him a DM and say, "Hey, not to be weird, but welcome to Nebraska. Would you like to come over for some pot roast and maybe sign my jersey?"
See, I have a great pot roast recipe. The key is Coca-Cola.
Ooh, yes. I've heard that.
Oh, it makes the best pot roast.
You need the Lipton
French onion soup mix.
You need that soup mix. You need the meat. It's got to be good.
Oh, you got to get the chuck roast.
The chuck roast
chuck roast, Lipton French onion soup mix, and then you go a little bit of cream of mushroom soup.
Yeah,
and Coca-Cola. Can of Coke.
But how much onion do you put in with the potatoes, the baby potatoes?
I don't do the potatoes. I do carrots and onion. That's it.
No, you got it. The potatoes are key.
Well, I'll throw in some garlic cloves, too, but I keep the potatoes out, and I'll slow roast those in the oven if I want the potatoes.
Okay.
They get mushy and gross if you let them go all day.
Dude, they soak up all of that goodness.
They get all mushy.
Debate tomorrow. It's fine. Talk to you at 4. Thanks for spending time with Hail Varsity, presented by Currency.